Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast, where business owners like you come to learn how to grow the valuation of their companies so they can sell in the future. On this show, you'll learn how to sell for top dollar and invest in profitable businesses around the country. Now, here are your hosts, Jazz and Joe.
Welcome back to Abundant Culture Podcast. This week we have Boris on here, and he owns an electric bike company and a real estate company that specializes in short-term rentals. We are so excited to have you on today, Boris. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode and, all your businesses, give us that backstory. Like, tell us the entrepreneurial journey that you had.
Yeah. To be honest, I think it goes back to my very, very first job when I was 16. And I got a job at Burger King. And I still remember it. It was a great year there. But after that, I think it set the seed of an idea that I don't want to work where I have to trade hours for compensation. So that basically led to one thing, and then the first business, second business, and where we are today, which is the electric bike company and a real estate hospitality company.
Okay. So where did you come up with the idea to get into, which one did you get into first? Was it the bike company or the...
Yeah, so the electric bike company, which is called EVELO, that one I've been running for about 10 years. I've actually co-founded it with my brother. Right now we have a great team of about 15 people. And, I've always been a cyclist and always enjoyed it. And it just felt like a very natural fit when we saw the rise in popularity in electric bikes and kind of green transportation in the US.
Awesome. And so when you decided that you wanted to go out on your own and be an entrepreneur, was that the first thing that you really gravitated to, or did you have other options? How did you hone in on that's the thing that you wanted to invest your time and money into?
Well, to be frank, I was quite lucky because it all started, I would say at this point, about 20 years ago, just when the internet was starting to be more popular. And at that time, I was able to start and sell about 2 small tech companies. And that allowed me to have the fund to actually invest into the electric bike space, which is something that I was really interested in on a personal and professional level. So that's kind of what helped to get it going.
Awesome. So how did you go about acquiring your first customers in that electric bike company?
It's a great question. It was, well, I'll tell you what we did actually. When we just started the company, we thought, okay, how can we convince people who don't know us, don't know our brand, to spend $2,000 to $3,000 on a product that they order online, sight unseen? So one of the very first things that we've done was actually organize a Trans-American electric bike expedition, where myself and a partner actually went from New York to San Francisco on our own bikes. And this was done both as a marketing and PR stunt, but also as a way for us to test the products and to really prove it both to ourselves and to the customers that the product that we have will last.
Wow. That's impressive.
That is impressive. And how long did that take?
It was about 2.5 months. So we cycled around 3,000 miles over around 10 to 12 weeks.
Wow.
That's really impressive.
It is.
I think it's
a great trip.
Yeah, I think it's you made the sale pretty easy after having that journey.
Yeah, it helped a lot because as we were doing it, we got a chance to do media in different cities and talks and presentations, and it really helped to kick off the brand and the conversation about the company. And so it was essentially a really great first step.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Definitely.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I was really wondering is how did all of that really segue from you have this bike company, you go on this super long trip to get all this publicity, and now you have enough attention in order to get sales through the door. How did that segue into the Airbnb business that you have now, or the short-term rental business that you now have?
Oh, absolutely. So it was an interesting addition to our how we spend our time. So it all started with, as it is for many Airbnb hosts, with just a love for traveling. And actually, my wife and I, we've always talked about being an Airbnb host. And a few years back, we did something where we sold, where we gave up our apartments and we bought a boat. And my wife and I, we decided to move out on the boat. And we were thinking from the very first time that we've done it that when we were traveling, we would rent it out and kind of as an Airbnb host. So we've done a lot of research and kind of explored it further. That didn't quite pan out. We still lived on the boat, but we just didn't rent it. But we did end up buying one of our first properties that we proceeded to Airbnb. And, in some ways, it was really quite life-changing because it was a business that just like the electric bike company in some ways, where if you're creative, if you really think about how you market your property, how you set it up, it can be very lucrative. So the first property led to a second one, and then to the third one, and today we have the hospitality company that hosts about 10,000 guests a year in different properties around the country.
Awesome.
So how many properties do you have right now?
So we have about 7 buildings with about 10 apartments between all of them.
That is really nice. So it seems like you're pretty much this serial entrepreneur and you're running multiple companies at the same time. Can you tell me about some of the systems that you put in place that allow you to not only run one business, but two simultaneously?
Absolutely. So, the first one is a little bit of a cliche, but it's really quite true. We've been blessed and very lucky with the team members that we've hired and that have been with us for many, many years in both of the companies. But in another kind of a practical example, we rely a lot on technology to automate whatever we can automate. So to illustrate it, in Airbnb business, in the hospitality business, we use tools that automate 90% of guest communication. So all of the check-in instructions, checkout instructions, it even detects if guests ask questions about parking or early check-in and automatically responds to that. We also automate things such as pricing. So just like hotels, they usually have whole departments and tools that they use to determine what is the best price to charge for any given property for any given date. We're very lucky because today, even a small entrepreneur like ourselves, we have access to pretty inexpensive tools that can do the same exact thing and effectively save hours every week.
Nice.
Tech and people. I think that's what it comes down to.
So are you able to share with us like some of the different types of technology? Like, are they companies or which types of tools that you use?
Of course. So let's come back to the examples that we just talked about. So let's say if you're a real estate investor and you're operating a short-term rental Airbnb property or multiple ones. So one tool that we use is called SmartBnB. SmartBnB is that tool that helps automate communication with guests. The other tool that I mentioned earlier, which is price management, there's a tool that we use called Price Labs. And where for really $20, $30 per month, it gives you this amazing ability that previously maybe only larger hotels have been able to do, which is monitors all the pricing in your region. It looks at the competition, it looks at the demand, and then it sets your prices accordingly for every single day of the year.
Wow.
So again, super helpful and very, very, very inexpensive. In the grand scheme of things, these tools are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I've been studying a little bit more about AI, and I've just been so intrigued by what AI can do with businesses. And like while you're talking about this, I'm in my head like, oh, that must be AI that's like figuring that out on the back end. And before like I read this book, I really didn't know how much you really could do with technology. Like it's insane. Like I wouldn't have even thought that you could figure out like the best pricing for whatever's going on, to get the best amount of money on a night. Like I wouldn't have even known that was possible. So it's just crazy to know what technology can really do for a company.
Yeah. And the other thing which is really interesting, so in both of our companies, we have nearly fully remote teams. So with Airbnb for business, so we operate in about 5 different cities. And of course, we have teams on the ground, so housekeepers and maintenance that help us run the properties. But the back office team that helps to really run the operation on a day-to-day basis, it's all spread out, not just between different cities, but between different countries even. And the same thing for the electric bike company. We do have a warehouse, we do have a workshop in Seattle where we have a couple of team members, but the rest of the team is spread out all over the US.
Oh wow, that's
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah,
So
and then just to add to that, basically using technology and kind of figuring out how to keep everybody connected, how to make sure that we can operate effectively as a team, I think also comes into play.
cool.
So that kind of segues into my next question, which is like, how are you able to manage these teams, especially virtually, because it seems pretty difficult. And then also, kind of another question on top of that is, how are you able to hire such a great team? Like what kind of brought people in and what made them stay?
Sure. So if we're talking about the real estate business, so for that, what we do, the way that we manage is severalfold. We rely a lot on sharing of photos, videos. We rely a lot on checklists. Much like a strange example, but much like an airline pilot, in our case, every single procedure will typically have a checklist so that even when we onboard a new team member, let's say a new housekeeper in a particular market, it's very clear what the expectations are, it's very clear what needs to be done, and it makes it easier for us to verify whether or not the new person is paying attention to the details and able to perform their job. Now, for other team members, such as kind of our operations managers that manage the operations, it's a different skill set, and we also rely a lot on checklists and procedures, but in there we just focus a lot on the upfront, basically on just finding the right individuals with the right characteristics to bring on the team, because fundamentally all of the skills they can be taught. The most important thing for us is just somebody who is comfortable working remotely, has attention to detail, and also is just a pleasant person to work with, because ultimately we spend so much time together.
Absolutely. Yeah, most certainly. So one of the things I was wondering is, when it comes to running a Airbnb business, what do you think, in your opinion, is one of the keys to being really successful in that industry?
So in this case, I mean, it's a tough question, because I think a lot of it depends even on the definition of successful and what is it that people want to accomplish. But I would say it's being very clear about your objectives from the very beginning. It's not trying to do everything yourself, which again, oftentimes you have to in the very beginning, but really thinking about this from the perspective of scale on day one. Basically, as you're beginning to, let's say, even set up your property, you always want to think about, okay, well, if I want to do this 2, 3, 10 times, are the processes that I'm having in place well recorded? Are they scalable?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, in the case of real estate, of course, these days it's just having a source of capital will help. Just because it's for better or for worse, it's an unusual market that we're in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And one thing I want to highlight about what you just said was about having the processes available to make the business scalable. And I think that can relate to our listener so much, because our listener, they either have a business that they eventually want to sell, or maybe they're just trying to grow it right now and they're not really sure, what's next. But always having that vision of scalability is so important. So I just wanted to highlight that to make sure that the listener heard that, because you need to create the processes to make the business scalable, so that you have everything written out in case something happens and for future reference.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I'll be frank. It's a work in progress, and this is something that we're always learning how to do better as well. So I mean, just to give you an example, now as we're training new team members, we're starting to rely a lot more on the video recordings. So all of the training sessions where we teach a new team member how to perform a certain procedure or things of that sort, we record it, we organize it so that the next time we have to do it, somebody already will have access to this library of knowledge, which will save time and energy for us. So just as a simple example.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's actually pretty ironic that you're doing that because we're in the middle of doing the same thing too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and it's been learned the hard way too, because I think in the very beginning, frankly, when we were just starting, I don't think that we were even thinking about this from scale perspective, and we had a number of situations where effectively we were running uphill, where, for example, if one team member would leave, we would have to restart the entire training process and kind of really start from scratch and recreating and rethinking all of our procedures. And at a certain point, we just realized like that if in order to get bigger, we have to do things differently. So we gave it a lot of thought and really developed much better tools, the processes for us for that.
awesome.
I love that.
And just out of curiosity, is there a certain place where you're storing a lot of these kind of tutorial videos so that people can access them?
Yeah, so we've actually had a lot of fun testing out different systems. So what we've settled on now is so for the hospitality company, for the real estate company, we use a tool called Notion, which is effectively now a internal Wikipedia for the business, where any team member can find pretty much anything about the company there. We used to use a tool called Trello and Airtable to organize data, organize just information. And then for the electric bike company, EVELO, we rely a lot on a tool called Monday.com, which is a really great project management tool. All of them are inexpensive, and they all do a really great job at kind of helping slice and dice information and make it easy to keep track of stuff.
Cool.
So, what is the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome in business?
Well, I think that's a good question. So I would say that the biggest challenge now is figuring out what you're good at and how to best to allocate your time. Because I think that what happens for a lot of people is that as their initiative begins to grow, as their business to begins to grow, there's a lot of opportunities that come their way. And interestingly enough, what I've learned, and kind of a biggest challenge for has been for me, is that not every opportunity is something that you necessarily have to take advantage of. In other words, you actually, I think, have to be very selective and conscious about what is it that you want to pursue and what you want to allocate your time on, because otherwise you end up spinning your wheels a lot and maybe not growing as fast as you otherwise could have if you were focused. So again, for the challenge for me, especially with operating two ventures, is just really figuring that out and figuring out how to really focus and how to decide where I can add the most value.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very insightful. I think that can be really tough for any entrepreneur because everything looks so enticing to get into, but you only have so much time in a day and you can't do everything. So you have to be very strategic in what you pursue and what you actually turn down. So I think that's awesome. So we've talked about a few really, really key points in this episode, and you've given us a lot of good insights. In your opinion, what's the number one takeaway you want a entrepreneur or small business owner to really get from listening to you on this podcast episode today?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I would say that the number one takeaway that has been helpful for us is to really think through how technology can be used in your business to really accelerate your progress and your efficiency. Just because I think that for many businesses, almost irrespective of what industry you're in, you can just be much more effective at how you spend your time and how your team spends your time if you utilize technology properly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. I totally agree.
Mm-hmm. So you're on the Abundant Culture podcast, and we love to ask every single guest that comes on this question because we always get so many different answers. So the question is, whether it's in your personal life or your business life, how do you spread abundance?
It's a great question. So at this point, one of the things that we love to do the most is to actually talk to new real estate investors or even people who are thinking about getting into real estate and just pointing them in the right direction and helping them avoid to make a lot of the mistakes and time wasters that we've had when we were starting out. So for us, anybody that's interested in this, and we're always glad to help and have a chat.
Awesome.
That's great. So if somebody wants to work with you or your team, how would they get into contact with you all?
Sure. So the best way to get in touch is to check out our site at BuildYourBnb.com and just contact us through the site.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again so much, Boris, for coming on and giving us this wealth of knowledge. I really enjoyed this episode because I love business processes and systems. So this was right up my alley, and I truly enjoyed this episode. So thank you again for giving not only our listeners value, but Joe and I as well.
Awesome. It's really been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Abundant Culture Podcast with Jazz and Joe. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, then leave an honest rating and review. And remember, we're ready to buy your business. So if you're ready to sell or passively invest in other small businesses, go to abundantculture.co for more information. We publish episodes every Friday, so we'll see you next week.